The blood hit the floor first. Then the alarms started. Mara Vance stood beside the supply cart, silent. To everyone here, she was nobody important. Just a quiet surgical aide. Just another woman in gray scrubs. She kept her eyes down. She never argued. She never asked for credit. Nobody knew that Mara had once operated under fire. Nobody knew she had trained beside America's most dangerous special operators. Nobody knew why the letters JSOC were buried inside an old scar beneath her left wrist. Then the emergency doors exploded open. 2 paramedics rushed inside with a bleeding man. "Move!" Mara looked at his face. She stopped breathing. The medic shouted one word. "Viper." The word hit the room like a detonation. And Mara knew the past had finally found her. If you enjoy stories about hidden heroes like this video, subscribe, and comment where you are watching from. You are watching Silent Heroes. Mara moved again. Slowly. Carefully. As if nothing had happened. St. Catherine's Trauma Center stood in downtown Baltimore, surrounded by traffic, concrete, and winter rain. Inside, everything smelled of antiseptic, plastic, and burnt coffee. Nurses hurried through bright hallways while monitors beeped behind closed doors. Mara had worked there for 11 months. 11 quiet months. She wore her dark brown hair tied tightly behind her head. Her gray eyes rarely met anyone's for more than a second. A thin white scar crossed the base of her left thumb. Another disappeared beneath her sleeve. Her hands were the strangest part. They never shook. Except when someone asked about her past. She had learned to make herself small. Do not speak first. Do not correct anyone. Do not become memorable. For 4 years, she had followed those rules. Her employee file listed her as Mara Vance. No military history. No special qualifications. No operational record. Just basic trauma training and a surgical assistant certificate. It was a lie. A carefully constructed one. The chief surgeon, Dr. Grant Hale, enjoyed reminding her of it. Hale was brilliant with a scalpel and terrible with people. He wore expensive watches, spoke in measured sentences, and never admitted mistakes. He had a habit of correcting employees loudly, especially when other doctors were nearby. "Ms. Vance," he had once said in the middle of the operating floor, "if competence were measured by silence, you would be extraordinary." The nurses had laughed. Mara had lowered her eyes. That was what Hale expected. He liked employees who feared him. He liked being the smartest man in every room. And he hated anyone who made him look uncertain. "Keep your hands away from decisions," he told Mara one morning. "You are here to assist, not think." "Yes, doctor." That answer always pleased him. But one patient had noticed. Mr. Ellis was 78 and had been admitted 3 times that year. He used a cane, complained about hospital food, and somehow remembered every nurse's name. One afternoon, he watched Mara arrange instruments. "You don't move like hospital staff," he said. Mara paused. "What do you mean?" "You look at doors before people." Her fingers stopped. Ellis smiled. "Whatever you're hiding, kid, you're not bad at it." Mara gave him a small smile. "Get some rest, Mr. Ellis." "I knew it." "Knew what?" "You weren't ordinary." Then he laughed and closed his eyes. Mara walked away. She remembered those words. By 7:42 the next morning, the trauma doors burst open. Male, 38. Penetrating chest injury. Pressure 80/50. Heart rate 142. The room changed instantly. Doctors rushed forward. Nurses pulled equipment into position. Dr. Hale took command. "Trauma Bay 1. Everyone follow my instructions." The patient was covered in blood. His tactical-looking clothing had been cut open by paramedic. A deep wound marked the right side of his chest. Mara saw something else. His breathing was wrong. Too shallow. Too fast. His neck veins were beginning to rise. The monitor flashed. Blood pressure, 78/48. Heart rate, 146. Oxygen saturation, 89%. Hale pointed toward the anesthesia team. Prepare for intubation. Mara stared at the patient's chest. No. The word escaped before she could stop it. Hale turned. What did you say? Mara swallowed. The tremor returned to her fingers. Nothing. Hale stepped closer. You interrupted me. The patient suddenly gasped. His blood pressure dropped again. 64/39. Mara looked at his trachea, then his neck, then the wound. 3 signs. Hypotension, distended neck veins, muffled heart sounds. Her mind moved faster than the room. Not airway failure. Not primary blood loss. Cardiac tamponade. Blood was collecting inside the pericardial sac, compressing the heart and preventing normal filling. In a rapidly deteriorating trauma patient, that pressure could become fatal within minutes. Waiting for a perfect imaging study could cost the patient his life. Mara stepped forward. Doctor. Hale raised his hand. Do not. The patient coughed. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then his eyes opened. He looked directly at Mara. For 1 second neither moved. His lips barely separated. Viper. Mara froze. Not anymore. The tremor vanished. Her shoulders straightened. Her lowered gaze lifted. The woman everyone had ignored disappeared. Someone else stood there now. Hale noticed it. So, he said slowly. You know this man? Mara didn't answer. The patient whispered again. Viper. Hale stepped between them. I asked you a question. Mara looked at the monitor. BP 5834. Needle. Hale stared. What? Pericardiocentesis. Several nurses looked at one another. Hale shook his head. No. We are preparing the operating room. Too slow. His face hardened. You will not override me. Mara reached for the sterile tray. Hale grabbed her wrist. Put it down. Mara looked at his hand. Then at the patient. Then back at Hale. Release me. The room went silent. Hale slowly let go. Mara took the needle. Her hands were steady. Completely steady. Ultrasound. A nurse moved immediately. The screen appeared. A dark fluid collection surrounded the heart. Mara pointed. There. Hale stared at the image. His confidence cracked for the first time. Give me the needle. No. His jaw tightened. I am the attending surgeon. Mara looked directly at him. And he's dying. The monitor screamed. Heart rate 158. Blood pressure 51/30. Mara positioned the needle carefully, guided by ultrasound. Stay still. The patient barely nodded. She advanced. 1 centimeter. 2. 3. The room seemed to stop breathing. Back 2 millimeters. She adjusted. Then blood appeared. Dark. Pressurized. Mara withdrew slightly. The patient's blood pressure began to rise. 61/37. Then 72/44. A nurse stared at the monitor. It's working. Mara didn't react. She kept her eyes on the patient. Keep monitoring. Hale stood frozen beside her. He had just watched a woman he publicly called incompetent save a dying man. And everyone had seen it. But the patient wasn't finished speaking. His fingers closed around Mara's sleeve. He whispered one final sentence. Your team is looking for you. Mara's face changed. Not fear. Recognition. Because there had been no surviving team. Not for 4 years. And somewhere beneath the hospital floor, someone had just opened a door that Mara had spent years trying to keep locked. By 7:49, the secret was no longer hers alone. By 7:51, the hallway was full. Nurses whispered. Security officers watched. Dr. Grant Hale stood beside the trauma bay, pale with anger. Mara remained beside the wounded man. The patient's blood pressure had reached 82/51. His heart rate was still dangerous, but he was alive. Hale stepped forward. Ms. Vance, leave the trauma bay immediately. Mara looked at him. No. The word was quiet. Hale's face tightened. You are suspended pending investigation. For what? For unauthorized medical intervention. Mara looked at the patient. He was dying. You acted outside your position. He needed treatment. Hale pointed toward security. Remove her. 2 guards stepped closer. Mara did not move. No. Hale blinked. What did you say? I am just done hiding. The hallway went silent. Nobody moved. Then the trauma bay doors opened. 3 people entered. The first wore a dark military uniform. The second carried a federal identification badge. The third was an older man with silver hair and a scar across his jaw. Mara saw him. Her face went completely still. Colonel Daniel Mercer stopped 6 feet away. He looked at Mara, then at the wounded patient, then back at Mara. Captain Vance. The hallway seemed to shrink. Hale stared. Captain. Mercer continued. Former Joint Special Operations Command Medical Officer. Combat Trauma Specialist. Senior Tactical Medicine Instructor. Nobody spoke. Mercer took one more step. 3 Bronze Stars. A nurse covered her mouth. 2 Army Commendation Medals. Mercer looked directly at Hale. 4 years attached to classified Special Operations Units. Hale shook his head. That is impossible. The Federal Liaison opened a folder. It is documented. Hale looked at Mara. You told us you were a surgical aide. I was. You lied. Mara's expression stayed calm. I survived. Mercer's voice hardened. Dr. Hale, you are no longer authorized to supervise this patient. Hale stepped backward. You cannot remove me from my own hospital. The federal officer closed the folder. Actually, we can. Security moved toward Hale. He raised both hands. This is absurd. She is unstable. She disappeared from military service and changed her identity. Mara looked at him. I left because my team died. The room became silent again. Hale's confidence vanished. But he was not finished. You think this makes you a hero? No. Mara looked at the wounded man. It makes me responsible. That sentence ended the argument. For a moment. Then the hospital lights went dark. Everything stopped. Monitors flickered. The backup generators failed. Someone screamed. Emergency lights turned red. Mara immediately moved. Doors. Mercer understood. Lock them. Mara looked toward the trauma bay. Protect the patient. 3 armed men appeared at the far end of the corridor. They wore maintenance uniforms, but their shoes were tactical. Their movements were wrong. Mara saw the first weapon before anyone else did. Down. Gunfire cracked through the hallway. Glass exploded. People dropped behind counters. Mercer drew his weapon. Mara grabbed a rolling equipment cart and shoved it sideways, creating cover between the attackers and the trauma bay. Stay down. The first attacker rushed forward. Mara caught his wrist. Twisted. Hard. His weapon fell. She drove her shoulder into his chest and sent him into the wall. The movement was fast. Clean. Automatic. No wasted motion. A nurse stared at her. You said you were an aide. Mara didn't answer. She took the fallen weapon and pushed it away. Get everyone into the operating rooms. Mercer fired 2 controlled shots toward the ceiling near the attackers, forcing them back. Then Hale appeared from a side corridor. His face was terrified. They're here for the patient. Mara turned. How do you know? Hale froze. That was enough. Mercer looked at him. You knew this was coming. Hale said nothing. Mara understood. The patient wasn't just a wounded stranger. He was evidence. And Hale wanted him dead. Take him to surgery, Hale suddenly shouted. Now. Mara stared at him. You wanted him dead 5 minutes ago. Hale's voice cracked. He knows everything. There it was. The truth. Mercer stepped forward. What does he know? Hale backed away. The trial. Mara looked at him. What trial? Hale swallowed. The hospital had been running an experimental trauma program funded through a private defense contractor. Patient records had been altered. Complications had been hidden. Deaths had been labeled unavoidable. The wounded man had discovered the falsified report. Hale had signed them, and Mara's intervention had saved the one person who could expose everything. Hale reached inside his coat. Mara moved first. "Drop it." He pulled a small pistol. Mercer shouted. Hale fired. Mara pushed the patient's bed sideways. The bullet struck the metal rail. Mara tackled Hale. They crashed onto the floor. Hale fought wildly. "You ruined everything." Mara pinned his wrist. "You ruined lives." He stared at her. "You don't understand what they paid me." Mara's eyes hardened. "Now I do." Mercer restrained him. Security arrived seconds later. Hale was handcuffed in the same hallway where he had humiliated Mara for months. Nobody laughed now. Nobody looked away. The patient suddenly deteriorated. Pressure dropping. Mara turned instantly. "What's the number?" 72/40. Heart rate 160. Prepare for surgery. The patient was rushed into the operating room. Mara followed. Mercer stayed outside. For the first time in 4 years, Mara stood beneath surgical lights again. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. But the past was inside the room with her. The patient looked at her through half-open eyes. "Viper." Mara leaned closer. "Stay with me," he whispered. "They all remember." She knew who he meant. Her old team. The men and women whose names had lived inside her head every night. One name hurt more than the others. Eli Carter. Her closest teammate. Her best friend. He had died during the mission that ended her military career. Before he died, he had sent one final message. Mara had never listened to it. She had been too afraid. Now the Federal liaison entered the room and placed a small recording device beside her. "We recovered this from the patient." Mara stared at it, then pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Eli's voice. "If you're hearing this, Viper, stop blaming yourself." Mara closed her eyes. The surgeon beside her watched silently. Eli continued. "You saved everyone you could." His voice broke. "You always did." Mara opened her eyes. The monitor alarm sounded. Blood pressure 49/29. Clamp ready. The surgical team moved. Heart rate 172. More blood. Pressure 42/26. Mara's voice remained calm. "Stay with me." She controlled the bleeding. The surgeon followed her instructions. 30 seconds. The monitor screamed. Heart rate 181. Mara looked at the patient's face. Eli was wrong about one thing. The nurse looked at her. "What?" Mara pressed the clamp into position. "I didn't save everyone." Silence. Then the monitor changed. Pressure 68/40. The bleeding slowed. 68. Heart rate 140. Keep going. Mara made one final adjustment. The monitor stabilized. 82/50 seconds. She exhaled. Got it. The operation continued for another 40 minutes. At 9:18, the patient was alive. At 9:24, Dr. Grant Hale was formally arrested. His medical license was suspended pending criminal charges. Investigators seized hospital records, financial documents, and encrypted communications connecting him to the fraudulent trial. Within weeks, the hospital board was dissolved. The trauma program was shut down. The falsified patient files were reopened, and the hospital created a new oversight policy named after the first nurse who had reported Hale's misconduct. Mr. Ellis. He had survived. Barely. But he returned to the hospital 2 weeks later with his cane. Mara found him sitting near the window. He looked at her uniform, then smiled. "So." Mara sat beside him. "So. You finally stopped pretending." Mara looked through the glass at the city. "Yes." Ellis nodded. "Took you long enough." She smiled. For the first time, there was no tremor in her hands. No lowered gaze. No fake name. 3 weeks later, Mara accepted a new position at St. Catherine's. Not as an aide. Not as a hidden specialist. She became director of the hospital's new tactical trauma and emergency response program. Her job was simple: train doctors, train nurses, prepare teams for the patients nobody else was ready for. She kept one rule from her old life: nobody worked alone. On her first morning, Colonel Mercer stood beside the training room door. "You ready, Captain?" Mara looked at the new group of nurses, then at the surgical equipment, then at her hands. Yes. She no longer needed to make herself small. She had spent years believing survival meant hiding. She finally understood the truth. Survival was only the first step. Healing meant becoming visible again. And sometimes the person everyone overlooked was the person who had been carrying the room all along. If this story stayed with you, like the video and subscribe to Silent Heroes. Comment below: would you have trusted Mara when nobody knew her past? And remember, the next story is already waiting. The end.